My reply is, I would say, pretty simple. Obviously it's a major problem, but at the same time, I think we have to go to the very origin of the problem. If the fact of having billionaires, I don't think it's an issue as such, depending on the profile of the billionaire. If you're a billionaire in a country like India or an emerging economy, and you became a billionaire because you have oligopoly or a monopoly on products or goods or services, then it's a major problem. If you are a billionaire because you're Elon Musk and you have invented Tesla, and you have, by the way, made public the patents for electrical vehicles like he did, or because you launch satellites as he's doing, or for example, because you have helped in finding out a vaccine against COVID, then it's a different issue. And then not only you're not depriving necessarily the rest of the population from staple food or from basic services to basically increase your profit, but actually you're providing globally a good service to humanity. So it's a matter of the legitimacy, not in terms from a legal point of view, but from an economic point of view. Where is this wealth coming from, and why it's being generated this way? For example, if you are a billionaire because you are a Middle Eastern royal family, and your family controls for the last 80 or 100 years the country, and it's not an open democracy, and it's not an open market, and the family trusts, controls quite a lot of the economy, and particularly oil reserves, then obviously it's a major problem, because that wealth should belong in theory to everyone and not necessarily to one single family. So to me, it's extremely important to understand the roots and the origin of such a wealth, and whether it has been done keeping an eye and concentrating on providing real added value to a large number of people, or just simply directly or indirectly exploiting a large number of people for your own private wealth. I think it's a very interesting question. Actually, it touches directly to the very nature of capitalism, and to the problems linked to capitalism. In theory, socialism, the way Marx devised it, in theory, it's a fantastic ideology. The problem is that in reality, it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because of human nature. And human nature, I mean, we've seen it with the Soviet Union, we've seen it with most of the communist countries. What happens is that you always have an emerging elite that trusts and controls the whole country and crushes the largest majority. So although in theory it's a fantastic ideology, in practice it never works. I think human beings are, in theory, always motivated by trying to improve their own situation for themselves and for their families. So killing, so to speak, the motivation of improving your own situation, even of course from an economic point of view, through imagination, through creativity, through hard work, I think will not solve the problems of the planet. The way to solve part of these problems is being able, for the largest part of the population, and particularly for economic elites, but also and mainly political elites, to get to some level of consciousness that actually, and to some ethics that actually make them understand that they should be at the service of the population and should not be at the service of their own pocket or their own power or their own ego. And it's a long path to get there. Now, we've seen, for example, with what's going on with Ukraine and the war, ultimately, although we have lots of problems with our democracies in Western Europe, but also in the US, ultimately it's still a system to which we are very well attached, very much attached, because it's based on freedom, and it's based on a redistribution of wealth, although you have a number of billionaires in Europe as well and in the US. But at the end of the day, it's a much, quote unquote, fairer system than many other systems, where you have economies that are based on a number of families that trust, largest chunk of the economies in many countries, or where you have a political elite, which is almost like a dictatorship that controls, a lot of the economy, which is, by the way, also the case in Russia with the oligarchs and the current regime, or in many other countries around the world. So ultimately, it's a matter of consciousness, and it's a matter of making sure that our future political elites, but also our future business leaders, go through a thinking process that introduces into the notion of capitalism not the fact that the capitalism should be at the service of the shareholders and the owners of a company, but that capitalism should be at the service of the whole society at large. And if we were to make the mentality evolve towards a fair share of the overall pie, it would be fantastic. Now, the way to achieve that is not through higher taxation, because that's a way to reprimand. It's a way for repression in economic terms, but then capital will move elsewhere. If taxation is too high, capital is very mobile. So the answer to that is changing a lot the system and making sure that within the rules of capitalism, we include what is called not only shareholders' value, but particularly enlarge that concept into stakeholders' values. And the stakeholders' values means that for any company, whether it's listed on the stock market or private, it's not only the interest of the shareholders, but it's also the interest of the employers, the employees in the company. It's the interest of the people with whom the company interacts, which means suppliers, service providers, of course, customers, but also the way that the company interacts with the local population where the company is active. Let me give you an example. If you're a major retail company and you have shops in many countries around Western Europe, your shops or your shopping centers, how do they integrate in the local geography? How do they integrate in the local social sort of, would say, texture? How do they interact? What do they do for the local population? What type of green measures do they take for their buildings, for example, or for decarbonation or CO2 emissions? What do they give back in terms of, not only in terms of dividends, but in terms of spending money, investing money into helping, for example, the employees for example, to provide days that are paid for by the company, but actually can help local population. So wealth is not only an economic concept. Wealth is an abstract concept which has an economic component and monetary component, but also has a social component as well as an environmental component. And that's why the concept of stakeholder, it's a much larger concept than just shareholders' value. It's stakeholders' value at large. That requires a profound change of mentality, and that should start from our business schools, should start from our universities and from our schools. And it's more a philosophical and an ethical approach that has to be brought into the business world. And that will take at least a generation. And I'm now seeing a number of signs in different companies, for example, with ESG, it takes time, but gradually there are a number of values which are being sort of conveyed, including, of course, green values. And I think also institutions like European Investment Bank, like the European Union, like, pushing for green bonds and for decarbonation, I think, are indications and measures that go really in the right direction.